The lawyer's office smelled like cheap coffee and old paper. And I remember thinking it was strange how betrayal always came dressed in suits and signatures. I sat there, hands folded in my lap, my name printed in crisp font across a legal document I never asked to see. My mother sat across from me, her scarf neatly pinned, her lips pursed like she'd just tasted something sour. My father wouldn't even look at me. He kept checking his watch, like this whole thing was taking too long, like my shock was an inconvenience. The man in the suit adjusted his glasses and said the words slowly, as if I were a child. "They're filing for ownership claim, on the basis that the property purchased was meant for your sister." He paused for effect, as if decency demanded he'd give me a moment to react. I didn't. I blinked. "That was all. You used family funds," he added. "They say you betrayed an agreement." Agreement, that word still rings in my skull like a lie with sharp edges. There was never an agreement. I bought that house with my own savings, scraped together from tutoring, graveyard shifts, working weekends when everyone else was sleeping in. I never asked them for a cent, not even when my shoes had holes, or when the flu left me curled on cold tile floors. But now, here they were, my parents, the two people I had once believed would die for me, now ready to drag me through court, discredit my name, and hand my home, my peace, to the golden daughter who'd never worked a day in her life. She wasn't there that day. Of course not. She never needed to show up. She had them wrapped around her finger like ribbon on a gift. The gifted child. The bright one. The one they told the world about while I sat quietly, folding laundry, cooking meals, cleaning messes I didn't make. I remember sitting in that chair, thinking how funny it was. I had no tears left. No words. Just this hollow silence swelling inside me like a wave, too exhausted to crash. I didn't speak as the lawyer outlined their intentions. I didn't interrupt when my mother finally leaned forward and said, "You knew it was supposed to be hers. It, my home, the one I'd painted, repaired, and built from the bones of nothing. The first space I ever felt safe in. A place where no one raised their voice, no one slammed doors, no one drank until rage spilled onto the floor. That house wasn't just walls and windows. It was my sanctuary, and they wanted to take it, not because they needed it, but because she asked, because I had something she didn't, because they still believed she deserved more, even if it meant stealing from the daughter who never once complained when love came in leftovers and silence." The meeting ended. I stood slowly. The lawyer asked if I had anything to say. My father adjusted his My mother was already on her phone, and in that moment, I understood everything. Love was not always given equally. Sometimes it's rationed out like punishment, and I was always the one who could survive on less. I looked at them one last time. I didn't ask why. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I simply walked away. The house sat on the edge of the hill like it had always belonged to someone who knew the meaning of silence. When I first bought it, the roof leaked like a broken promise, and the floorboards creaked like bones under pressure. But I didn't mind. I patched the leaks myself, scrubbed the stains from forgotten corners, and taught myself how to make something beautiful out of something abandoned. It wasn't a mansion, not by the standards of my sister's taste or my parents' pride, but it was mine. Every nail, every splinter, every brushstroke on those pale green walls carried the story of my hunger to belong somewhere without having to ask permission. I remember staying up past midnight to sand the door frames, smooth, humming to myself in that kind of tired that feels honest. When the curtains went up, hand-stitched by me, I cried. Not because they were perfect, but because they finally framed peace. I kept photos on the mantel. Even then, faded snapshots of birthdays and graduations, of scraped knees and kitchen dance parties, me with frosting on my cheek at 7, my sister clutching a trophy I had driven her across the state to win, my parents in the background of a family picnic, my father pretending to hate the sun, my mother pretending to laugh. They never liked pictures, but I clung to them, to the fragments, to the moments that felt real, even if they were only flickers between storms. When I moved in, I told myself I was building a legacy, something different, something that wouldn't echo with the same sharp-edged love I grew up with, the kind that left bruises on the heart without ever raising a hand. That house became my whole heart laid bare. The kitchen smelled of cardamom and cinnamon. On winter mornings, I grew herbs in little clay pots by the window, just to feel something green under my fingers. My bookshelves sagged with stories, not just fiction, but recipes I learned from trial and error. Journals I never let anyone read, and sketches of how I'd someday expand the back porch. I remember once painting the guest room a soft, sea glass blue, thinking maybe someday my parents would visit. Maybe they'd sit there with tea and ask how I was, not what I was doing for my sister. Not if I'd forgiven her for her messes, but how I was. They never did. They sent cards on holidays, signed in my father's stiff handwriting, with messages that felt more like obligations than affection. Over time, the laughter faded, the visits stopped. They spoke of my home as if it were a phase, something temporary, something borrowed. Even after I hosted that one New Year's dinner, the one where I made everything from scratch and my sister showed up 2 hours late with takeout, my mother told everyone she saved the meal, as if I hadn't bled into every bite. They stopped mentioning my name when talking to relatives, only referring to the house she lives in, never the home she built. My father once said it outright, "It's not like it'll matter in the long run. She has no children. Who's she leaving it to anyway?" The walls heard it all. They remembered. The house grew quieter each year, not from lack of joy, but from the erosion of hope. I still cleaned it like it mattered. I still whispered goodnight to it like it was listening, but it no longer echoed back warmth. The fireplace crackled, but the heat didn't reach my bones the way it used to. Something had changed, or maybe I had. Either way, it was no longer a sanctuary. It was a monument, a breathing archive of sacrifice, of silence, of things given freely and never returned. It used to be filled with love. Now it only remembered me. I spent years pouring myself into people who believed my love was disposable. At first, it looked like care, soft offerings folded into the corners of their lives. I was the one who sat up all night testing my sister's speech for her university interview. Even though I had exams the next morning, I remember watching her walk across the graduation stage, her robe swaying, her smile wide. My parents clapped like she had climbed Everest. I clapped too silently, in the back row, because they had forgotten to reserve me a seat. My name wasn't in the program, but hers was in bold. She never noticed, or maybe she did, and liked it that way. I gave them more than time. I gave them parts of me I will never get back. The down payment for her car came from my savings account. I told them it was a gift. They told others it was my duty. When she wanted to study abroad, I put my dreams of travel on a shelf and helped her apply. Edited her essays, even called the embassy on her behalf. I remember standing at the airport, waving with trembling hands as they all left, the three of them, without once asking if I needed anything. My mother sent a picture of the Eiffel Tower later that night. "Wish you were here," she wrote. But she didn't. She never did. When my father's back gave out and the bills piled up, I was the one who called every insurance company, who walked the corridors of hospitals, who brought them groceries when their fridge was empty. I never complained. I thought that was love showing up, over and over, even when it hurt. I learned to translate medical jargon. I negotiated payment plans. I paid off credit cards that weren't mine. They said, "You're so good at this stuff," as if my usefulness was more important than my presence. And when my sister threw that extravagant wedding, when she wore lace that cost more than my annual rent, it was me who stayed behind to clean up the mess. I folded chairs, I swept confetti, I carried the leftovers in silence. She didn't thank me. Instead, she laughed with her new husband about how clingy I was. I remember standing in the kitchen the next morning, washing dishes while they sipped champagne in the living room, and hearing her say, "She'll never leave. She doesn't have a life of her own." That was the moment something inside me cracked, but I kept scrubbing, because that's what I always did. I cleaned the messes. I swallowed the pain. I filled the holes they didn't even know they left behind. Even birthdays became transactional. They'd call late, if at all, voices full of guilt, not warmth. My mother would ask if I was still in that house, like it was a phase I'd grow out of. My father once joked that I should have gone into customer service, since I was always so eager to please. I laughed, but it wasn't funny. It was a warning disguised as a joke, that they saw me as a servant, not a daughter. Looking back, I don't know which part hurts more, that I gave so much, or that they never asked how much it cost me. Not in money, but in spirit. In moments I'll never get back. In dreams I buried so theirs could live. I held their hands through storms, stood in shadows while they basked in praise, and still, it wasn't enough. When they took me to court, they didn't just take what was mine, they took what I built for them. I didn't scream. I didn't shatter anything when I got home. I just sat at the edge of my bed and listened to the sound of my own breath, calm, but shifting. That night, I didn't sleep. I opened drawers I hadn't touched in years, files that still smelled faintly of ink and mildew. I traced the edges of receipts, scanned old emails, flipped through folders they thought I'd forgotten. There was something cold blooming in my chest, not anger, not even grief anymore, something older, more precise. It was the feeling of peeling back a curtain and seeing not just betrayal, but the machinery behind it rusted, premeditated, and designed to collapse with me underneath it. The first thing I found was the joint account, one I had opened years ago. When my father was recovering from surgery and needed help managing payments, I remembered the day clearly, sitting at the bank with him nodding vaguely while I handled the paperwork. I was listed as the primary administrator, or so I thought. When I looked again, I saw the modification date. My name had been quietly removed last year. I cross-checked the authorization signature. It wasn't mine. It was a careful replica, shaky, in just the right ways to mimic my handwriting. Not perfect, but enough to fool a board clerk on a slow Tuesday. My chest tightened, not from shock, but from clarity. Next came the property records. I'd kept them in a locked drawer, or so I believed. The copies were still there, neat and untouched. But when I accessed the digital registry, the details had changed. The backup contact listed wasn't me, it was my sister. A change requested online. The access code was familiar. It was the same password I used for everything back then. The one I told my sister when she lost access to her college forms years ago. She remembered. She always remembered things that could be used later. I found more than I expected. Small withdrawals linked to my personal account, masked as utility payments. A slow siphoning over 2 years, the kind that's only noticeable if you track every penny. I found email drafts between them. Not addressed to me, but about me. She won't fight, my mother wrote. She's too proud, she'll walk away. And my sister replied, exactly, she doesn't need it like I do. This is the only way. It was dated months before they took me to court. Before they even asked me about the house, they had already decided that the realization didn't come like a storm. It came like frost. Slow, deliberate, creeping into my bones. Every lie, every omission. Every moment I had been told you're overreacting or you're too sensitive, it all sharpened into something surgical. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a blueprint, a theft planned with intimacy, executed with cruelty, and wrapped in the language of entitlement. I sat for hours in that room, the documents spread out like a battlefield map. I didn't cry, not once. I felt something steadier than sadness, a terrible stillness, like the calm water before it freezes solid. I thought of every time they called me strong, responsible, resilient. I thought of how they used that strength not as a compliment, but as a convenience, a license to take from me because I wouldn't break, because I wouldn't scream, because I wouldn't fight like they would. But they were wrong. I wasn't broken. I was awake. They thought I was weak. They forgot who taught them strength. I began waking up before dawn again, not out of worry, but calculation. The kind of early rising that belongs to farmers, fighters, and people who've decided they're done bleeding. I'd walk around the house barefoot, the floor cold beneath my heels, notebook in hand, writing names, dates, amounts, not just what they'd taken, but how they did it, and when. I made coffee like I used to in my 20s, black and bitter, no sweetness left in it. The silence of those mornings wasn't lonely anymore. It was focused, controlled. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. I let the world think I was still stunned, still grieving. That was the gift of being underestimated. They wouldn't see it coming. Her name was Denise. I hadn't spoken to her in almost a decade. She used to be a junior clerk at a law firm where I once temped in my early 30s. She'd been smart even then, sharp-eyed, polite, always watching. She was the kind of person who read the fine print for fun. I called her one afternoon, voice steady, like I was ordering groceries. She didn't hesitate. Send me everything, she said, quietly. We met twice, once in a bookstore, once in a quiet cafe near the edge of town. She reviewed my documents like a surgeon reviews an x-ray. No pity, just precision. You have a case, she said, a strong one, but we'll move slow, invisible. And that's how it began. The unbuilding, the quiet undoing. I didn't shout, I didn't warn them. I filed corrections. I reported forged signatures. I requested audits with words so polite they couldn't be challenged. Denise helped me file ownership reinstatement requests, not under my name, but under a trust I'd formed using a clause buried so deep in the county charter it hadn't been touched since 1979. I had time. I had clarity. And above all, I had truth. Not the kind that needs applause, but the kind that stands quietly in a courtroom and cannot be undone. They called me 3 times that month. I didn't answer. My sister left voicemails, voice all sugar and dust. Hey, just checking in. Hope you're okay. There's some confusion with the house paperwork. Can we talk? I saved every message. I wanted to remember the moment the panic started to slip into her tone. My mother emailed me asking if I'd seen her favorite tea set she accidentally left at my place. I hadn't, because she never did. They were testing the waters, prodding the silence, trying to see if I'd crack, but I didn't. I was already gone, not physically, but emotionally. And once you remove your heart from someone's reach, they can no longer harm it. I stopped speaking to anyone who had ever told me to just forgive. I stopped explaining myself. There's a freedom in no longer needing to be understood. I moved through my days like a shadow made of steel, calm, deliberate, untouchable. I cooked for myself, cleaned my floors, watered my garden. I read case law at night. I printed everything. I took photos, scanned receipts, annotated time. The part of me that had once wept quietly in bedrooms now calculated interest and retaxed codes with surgical hunger. Something had shifted, not just around me, but inside me. They had wanted a fight, the kind with shouting and slammed doors. The kind they could weaponize to prove I was unstable, ungrateful, dramatic, but I had no intention of giving them noise. I would give them consequence. No announcements, no fireworks, just cold facts wrapped in polite language. Revenge is loud only when done by fools. Mine would be silent. It started like a shift in weather, so subtle, only those who'd been watching the sky would notice. The cracks didn't thunder open, they whispered. First, a letter from the property board to my sister, informing her of an ownership dispute under legal review. Then a frozen account, the joint one she used freely, suddenly marked with pending investigations. I imagine her standing at the grocery store, card declined, cheeks flushing in confusion. She would call the bank, voice tight, and they would speak to her the way institutions do when something no longer belongs to you, detached, cold, official. The way she had spoken to me once. I watched without watching. I didn't show up. I didn't need to. Word traveled through town like smoke. I heard that my father snapped at the clerk at the utility office. Apparently the electricity bill had doubled after a backdated adjustment. I heard that my mother's friend, the one she gossiped with over lemon tea, stopped coming by. Something about not wanting to be involved in messy family business. The silence began to form around them. Not my silence this time, but the one that falls when people start stepping away, just slightly, enough to avoid being scorched by proximity. My sister's social media grew quieter. Gone were the staged brunches, the curated smiles, the posts about family loyalty she once made when people started asking questions. The comments turned colder, shorter, then disappeared. I saw her name once on a forum thread, someone asking if she had truly bought the house in her name, or if it was a shady family deal. No one defended her, not even bots. They called again. Of course they did, but their messages were shorter now, tense. My father's voice, once deep and authoritative, now wavered beneath the surface, like a man who no longer trusts the ground he walks on. My mother tried warmth again, but it cracked around the edges like a ceramic smile. We just want to make things right, she said. This has gotten out of hand. But it hadn't. This was exactly the size of their hand. Only now it was turning on them. And my sister, she began slipping. I heard from an old colleague of hers that she'd come late to meetings, distracted. Once, she forgot her laptop entirely. Rumors began to bloom like mold under wallpaper, small, sour, persistent. It turns out that when you build a life on entitlement, it doesn't take much wind to blow the roof off. One by one, the support beams they leaned on began to rot. Not because I destroyed them, but because they were never real to begin with. I didn't celebrate. There were no toasts, no whispered good into the darkness. I simply continued, quiet, still. My garden grew, my files deepened, my evenings remained calm. But inside, something watched. I watched as their perfect little tower trembled, brick by brick, not from revenge, but from reality. They had never prepared for a world where I stood up, where I answered their cruelty with paperwork, their arrogance with strategy, their manipulation with time. The wind shifted. The drought they tried to bury me in circled back to them. Their reflections grew crueler. The mirrors they once used to admire themselves now showed rot at the corners, cracks crawling inward. And I didn't raise a hand. I didn't even raise my voice. They thought I disappeared. I was watching from the shadows. It was a Thursday when the knock came. Late afternoon, when the light turns gold and stretches long shadows across the floor. I knew the sound instantly, hesitant, uneven, not the knock of someone confident, but of someone hoping to be let in despite knowing they no longer belong. I didn't move at first. I let the moment breathe, let them stand there with whatever version of a story they had rehearsed in their heads. Then I opened the door, slowly, deliberately, as if the weight of it was heavier than before. My mother stood on the porch, my sister slightly behind her, arms wrapped around herself like she was cold, though it was warm enough to sweat. "Sweetheart," my mother began, voice cracking midway through the words she hadn't used in years. Her face was a mask of regret, the kind painted on too late. My sister didn't meet my eyes. She glanced toward the garden, toward the windows, toward anything that wasn't me. "Can we come in?" my mother asked. Her hands trembled slightly, not from age, from discomfort, from knowing she had to make herself small, at least for a while. I stepped aside without speaking, letting the silence guide them in like a ceremony. They walked in slowly, as if expecting the air to bite. It didn't, it just watched. My house, once theirs in name only, now fully mine in spirit. They stood in the living room, where everything was exactly as they had left it, and yet not. The warmth was gone, the laughter erased. Only truth remained now, quiet and sharp like glass under bare feet. "We've been thinking," my mother began. My sister sat on the edge of the armchair like it might reject her. "This whole situation, it's gotten out of hand. We never meant for it to go this far." Her voice was rehearsed, but not steady. There was a tremble beneath the words, a shiver of desperation thinly veiled as concern. "You've always been the strong one," she added, as if flattery could serve as glue for broken glass. My sister finally spoke. "I was under pressure. You know how things are. I never wanted to hurt you." Her voice cracked like thin ice. Her eyes glistened, the kind of tears that shimmer but don't fall. Performative moisture. She placed a manila envelope on the table. Some form, some offer, some pitiful attempt at retraction. "We can work something out," she said. "No courts, just us. As a family." I watched them speak, but I didn't reply. Not yet. I let them unravel, slowly, word by word. My mother started to cry softly, into a tissue pulled too quickly from her purse. The same purse she once claimed she'd pawn if it helped my sister's tuition. The same sister who had tried to erase me, and was now searching my face for signs of forgiveness, like a criminal waiting for a verdict. They mistook my silence for sympathy. But I wasn't quiet because I was moved. I was quiet because they no longer deserved sound. I sat still, back straight, hands folded. I let the silence harden around them like walls. Let them feel the weight of what they'd done. In every second I did not reach out. They came begging, but they didn't come clean. There was no real apology, only the fear of consequences. Their sorrow wasn't for what they did. It was for what they were losing. They left not long after. Their words lingered in the room like perfume from a stranger, cloying, unwelcome, fading fast. I didn't cry after they left. I didn't scream. I simply picked up the envelope, read it slowly, and filed it away. Not out of hope, just out of habit. I had listened, not to forgive, but to remember their tone. They returned on a Sunday. This time, they brought politeness like a bribe, warm tones, practiced smiles, the illusion of peace wrapped in wool-soft voices. My father came to now, standing just behind them, his posture stiff like someone attending a funeral he didn't believe in. I opened the door before they knocked. Their eyes flickered with surprise, then hope. I let them in, not out of kindness, but because the performance needed its final act. They stepped into the house slowly, like it might punish them. "Thank you for letting us come again," my mother said, glancing around as if searching for remnants of the home they once tried to claim. "We really want to move past all this." I nodded, saying nothing. Instead, I gestured to the dining table where 3 chairs were pulled out, and where a single black folder lay in the center. They sat, uneasy, like suspects called in for questioning but not yet read their rights. I remained standing. It was important. They look up to me now. "I want to show you something," I said. My voice was calm, deliberate, not cruel, just unshakable. I opened the folder and slid out the first document, a printed copy of the digital withdrawal logs from the joint account. My finger tapped the date, the signature, the change in authorization. "This was the first forgery," I said, no accusation in my tone, just facts. Their faces stiffened. Next, I laid out the modified property registration, highlighting the timestamp. the access history, the IP address that matched my sister's old apartment, and this is how you tried to move the house without my knowledge. I placed it beside the first page, slowly building a paper trail that told the story their words couldn't rewrite. Then this. I unfolded the printed email thread between them, the ones they thought were long deleted. You were planning this before you even asked me to dinner that week. You told her I was too proud to fight, that I'd walk away, that I'd leave quietly like I always had. My father shifted in his chair, jaw clenched. My mother reached for her purse, then thought better of it. My sister sat frozen, breath shallow, eyes darting between the documents, like they might rearrange themselves into something more flattering. I continued. Here's the legal transfer I filed under the trust. And this the auditor's report confirming the siphoned payments. Oh, and this one. I tapped a court-stamped notice, folded neatly, sealed with quiet vengeance. This is the reinstatement order you'll receive formally next week. But I wanted you to see it first. I thought you deserved the courtesy. My voice never rose. There was no triumph in it, only clarity. My sister opened her mouth, but I raised a hand gently. Don't, I said. Not yet. They looked at me differently now, not as the quiet daughter, not as the dependable one, not even as the burden bearer, but as something colder, something they didn't recognize, or perhaps something they feared had always been waiting beneath my silence. I don't want apologies, I said, and I don't need tears. This isn't about punishment. It's about correction, balance. I leaned forward slightly, my voice soft, like velvet covering a blade. You built this lie like it was a house. Now you'll dismantle it piece by piece. No one moved. No one dared. They had come, expecting mercy. Instead, they were handed evidence. They came hoping for emotion. Instead, they received order. I closed the folder gently, like a final page turned in a book I'd read too many times. I sat down, finally, across from them, eye level, unflinching. Now, I said, let's discuss how you'll make things right. The terms were not written in blood or rage. They were typed in clear font, reviewed by lawyers, notarized with quiet precision. I didn't demand apologies in front of crowds. I didn't ask for groveling. What I required was truth, signed in ink. The first condition was simple: full transfer of property ownership to the trust I created, with no contest, no appeal, no claim of mistake. The second, reimbursement for every unauthorized withdrawal, with interest calculated not just by math, but by dignity lost. My mother's hand trembled as she signed. My father read every line twice, as if understanding the consequences for the first time. My sister tried to argue once, something about fairness, about how they had always supported me in their own way. I didn't speak. I just slid the next document forward. The silence answered for me. I didn't ask them to stand in front of a camera or a judge, but I did request one letter each, handwritten, submitted through my attorney, stating in their own words that they had knowingly acted against my interests, manipulated financial access, and falsely claimed ownership of property that was never theirs. Those letters would be kept private, unless they ever tried to smear my name again. Insurance, truth, stored in silence. They wrote them, slowly, bitterly, but they wrote them. And there was one final clause, the one that made my sister pale when she read it: a formal disinheritance from anything bearing my name. I wouldn't let them benefit from me in death as they tried to do in life. No rights to my estate, no access to my assets. It wasn't spite, it was boundary. It was the clean edge of a line drawn too late, but still in time to matter. Forgiveness has an invoice, and I was tired of paying everyone else's debt. They never looked me in the eye during the final meeting. My father stared at the table, my mother blinked too often, and my sister kept folding the edge of her sleeve like she could stitch together what she had torn. I watched them from across the room, not with hatred, not even with sorrow anymore, but with the calm of someone who had returned to a burning house, not to save it, but to walk away once the flames were done. I had no desire to scream, to curse, to shame them. The world would forget their names, but I would remember the lesson. There's a kind of justice that doesn't need applause, only paper, silence, and the patience to wait for the truth to unfold like a map. They had gambled on my silence, bet everything on my love being soft enough to forgive anything. But love without respect is just a leash, and I had cut mine clean. I walked them to the door when it was done. They left quietly. No final words, no fake smiles. The sun was setting, and the light caught their shadows on the floor, long, brittle things that looked nothing like the people I once called family. As they stepped off my porch, I didn't follow. I didn't watch them go. I simply closed the door and exhaled. Mercy isn't free. I had given it 4 years, until it nearly cost me myself. Now, they were learning its price, not in screams or scandal, but in the erosion of power they thought was permanent. They didn't bleed, but they unraveled. Not all pain is loud. Some of it is administrative. Some of it comes in envelopes with signatures. They paid in silence, not money. The rain came gently that morning, tapping against the windows like someone too polite to intrude. I didn't rush to pull the curtains open. I just sat at the edge of my bed, listening to the soft percussion of a world washing itself clean. The garden outside had begun to breathe again, leaves heavy with water, soil dark and full. I made tea in silence, holding the warmth between my palms like it might teach my hands to trust again. There was no music playing, no emails waiting, just stillness, and in it, I could finally hear the sound of a life no longer shaped by the hunger to be chosen. I took out the old photo box that had once sat forgotten beneath my bed. Dust lined the edges, but the contents were untouched. A picture of me at 13, holding a school award, smile uncertain, my father's hand on my shoulder, my mother's gaze slightly off camera. I remember that day. I'd won despite a fever. No one mentioned it after. My sister had a piano recital the next week. That's what everyone talked about instead. I held the photo now without anger, only recognition. These were the faces of people who taught me how to survive silence by living in it. Later, I walked to the small cemetery outside town, the one where old neighbors rested beneath simple stones, not to mourn, but to visit the only woman who ever taught me to value solitude, my grandmother. Her grave was modest, but I kept it clean. I sat beside her, the grass damp beneath my coat, and told her everything, not in words, just in presence. She would have understood. She once told me, some wars are won with quiet, others with waiting. I hadn't understood it then. I do now. I didn't expect peace to feel like this, not loud, not triumphant, just soft. A steady rhythm where once there had been chaos. No more letters arriving in bold print. No more knocks filled with tension. No more voices pretending concern while carrying knives. They had retreated, one by one. I heard my sister had moved cities, that my mother had joined a different church group, less talkative, that my father stopped attending his Friday lunches. None of them mentioned me anymore, but I lingered in their lives like unfinished debt, not in revenge, but in echo. At home, I lit a candle, for no reason at all, just because it was raining, just because the silence now felt earned. I walked barefoot through each room, letting my fingers trace the walls, my walls, and thought about how many years I had spent building safety for others, giving warmth to people who only took it. Now, the house didn't feel empty. It felt full of breath, of memory, of reclaimed space. Even the floors seemed to hold me differently, no longer creaking with the weight of what I carried. I sat down at my desk, pulled out a clean sheet of paper, and wrote a single line in the center. I was never asking for love. I was building it, alone, all along. Then I folded the page, slid it into an envelope, and tucked it into the photo box. Not for anyone else, just for the me that once believed silence meant defeat. The storm outside softened into mist. The lights stretched through the trees like a promise kept too late, but still in time. And as I stood in the doorway, watching the sky let go, I realized they would never understand this kind of ending. They thought closure meant winning, that it meant returning, that it meant being welcomed back. But this was something else, something only I would ever truly feel. They wanted me gone. Now they can't move without me.